All right. So how do we make peace with ourselves so that we can make relationships with each other? How do we talk to ourselves? How do we learn to be kinder to ourselves? What do you think?
I think we have to forgive ourselves, and I think a lot of times that's really, really hard to do. Which is, then that becomes, it makes it worse on ourselves because we realize that when we don't forgive ourselves, that's a sin in itself because God is forgiven. So who am I to not forgive myself? But I think not forgiving ourselves can be a real block to.
Or not accepting God's forgiveness, as you said. That's another way to say that. Awesome. How do you make peace? Yes.
Our expectations of ourselves.
Right. Actually, being upset with yourself and thinking you're a worm and a terrible person and all this kind of stuff is very prideful. That you think you're so special that you could be the worst. And so special that you're so bad. So again, that's the other side of the pride coin. It's a negative pride, but it's a pride nonetheless. And the opposite of pride is loving God. Not putting yourself down, it's loving God. And being in the right perspective, being the right size. If you think that you can't do anything, if you don't accept your role as a Christian, then you lose opportunities to serve, to love, to witness to Christ. By selling yourself short, putting yourself down. And that becomes an excuse not to witness, not to live, not to love, not to grow. See, and that you can kind of put yourself in like a cocoon where you're just all about loathing yourself. Loathing yourself is pride and arrogance. Because it's about you instead of turning to God and recognizing that He's the goal. Our goal in life is to move from egocentrism to Christ-centrism. From self-centeredness to recognizing that God is God. We're here for a while and we're gone. Feels like Israel in the desert, you know? For 40 years they wandered around. And the older people taught the younger people their faith, their tradition, their scriptures, their truth. And the younger people became old and taught the next generation. And they became old and taught the next generation. And that's how we survive as human beings. And that's true in medicine, and it's true in science, and it's true in craftsmanship, where we guide and teach each other. It's kind of the way of the world. So how do we get over ourselves and allow God's love to shine forth? The priests and the bishops put on all these vestments where they cover themselves up. Because it's not about us, it's about God. And our role is to show not us, but God. Not to lead you to follow us, but to follow God. You know? And so we somehow disappear in our vestments. Because it's not my hand, but God's hand that blesses. It's not my majesty, it's God's majesty. You put on the white robe of baptism, which is a robe of light and brilliance, of knowledge, of truth, so that God can shine through you and then lighten the world. That's your robe, the white robes. You see, that's the baptismal robe. And our faith, Paul, on the casket is a representation of your baptismal role. It's a remembrance that what we need for salvation and what life is all about is given to us at the very beginning. And in our Christian walk, in our Christian movement. The wedding feast, you know, the ruler of the banquet, the ruler compels people come from the highways and the byways, you know, and then he says, you can't come in, where's your garment? What's that about? That's so confusing, right? Anybody confused by that gospel teaching? It's confusing. The wedding garment, or the baptismal garment, is your invitation. And if you dirty it up, or if you leave it behind, then you're disrespectful. Imagine the Russian church has 700 bishops, okay? And a bishop's vestment costs on average $2,000. And the mitre is another $2,000. All right, and the cross and gopians another $2,000. So $6,000 times 700 bishops. I don't know how many priests. So you're having a big celebration. So you have made all these vestments. And you know, the Russians, they like to do things up big, and everything's on TV, and they're, you know, going to make a big splash, right? And this one priest comes in purple vestments. And everybody else is matching vestments. And they've got all this money invested. What are they going to do? Get lost, buddy. Get lost. We sent you the vestment. I felt like wearing purple today. You know? God gives you a baptismal vestment. So we try to keep it clean. We bring it with us. We present ourselves as His. That's what that gospel is about. That's what the gospel is about. He gives us so much, and we have to use it. You don't. But He wants us to be successful. But we have to say yes, and we have to do it not as Frank Sinatra sings, my way. We have to do it His way. Because He's the boss. That's how it works. But He's merciful, and He's loving, and He's kind. So, stop judging yourself. Stop wasting time. Take your freedom and get to work. Show God's love, His joy, His peace, His contentment, and enjoy life. Put yourself out there and find people that you can identify as someone who would be good for you to be friends with, and invest some of yourself and some time and some energy, offer some invitations. And probably today people are so busy and so full of themselves that you may have to ask 10 people to meet you for lunch before you find someone who has an opening for lunch that's ready to go out. And rather than getting discouraged, just accept that as the truth that we live. You know? Father Michael asked me to visit, and he said, when's your first opening? I told him 5 months. He said, okay. We made the time. If he said, no, if you can't come this Sunday, forget it. He was kind to me, you know. But it's how it works. I have a cousin who Father Michael knows, and she called me and she said, when am I going to see you? I said to her, my first opening is, because she wanted to get together on a Saturday. I said, my first opening on a Saturday is in 6 weeks. She hung up the phone. She didn't believe me. You know, truth is, everybody's busy today. And we're involved in lots of things, but we need to make it a priority, and we need to work at it, and we need to make it happen for ourselves. Or else we'll be sitting around feeling bad for ourselves. And that's prideful. And it's self-centered. And it feels lousy. And it produces nothing good. You know? So we need to be vulnerable, we need to be open, we need to be a friend, and we need to be willing to do the work. And if it takes 5 phone calls, it takes 5 phone calls. And we don't need to be discouraged. When jobs are tight, sometimes it takes, I don't know, when my son was looking for a job, he at one point had 300 applications up that he was following. You know, and he was off work for like 5 months, and then he got 3 job offers the same week. It's crazy how it works sometimes, you know? But however it works, it works. You've got to deal with what you have. God calls us to be like him, and he keeps knocking. He keeps coming back. And when we're busy, we might be busy for years. And he doesn't get discouraged. Just keeps knocking. So I think we need to resolve to do the work, to have meaningful relationships. The church offers a format where that can happen, where we can be at home. But for that to happen, we need to be wise. We need to not freak each other out by sharing too much too fast. We need to be patient and aware of other people's responses. And we need to be vulnerable. That's how I see it. But I'm out of the bishop business here, so you could disagree with me on this. And it's okay. About God, you can't disagree with me. But for this, you can disagree. You're welcome to disagree. You're welcome to say things in a different way. You're welcome to share what works better for you. I mean, we're all in this together. I'm very, very happy to learn from you. You have different life experiences and different genes and different things. Yes?
I like where you're both saying. I think I mentioned yesterday that we have, unfortunately, a lot of friends outside of the church that are divorcing. And it's just curious, you know, how I can pray for them and how we can connect with them, or do we give them space, or you know what? Like that's our dilemma a little bit right now.
So if you're friends, what does that friendship allow you? I would suggest that it's always beneficial to ask permission. If I'm going to ask you about your marriage or something sensitive, I ask your permission first. And if they give you permission as a friend to ask about their relationship with their spouse, you can be curious. And in your curiosity, you can ask them about expectations and if their expectations are reasonable. You can share your own experiences and where you've tried different things and what kinds of things help and what kinds of things don't help. And you can tell them about forgiveness and new starts and new beginnings. And you can normalize the fact that people do get upset with each other. Part of the problem is we don't teach people how to fight. We don't teach people how to problem solve. You know, we have, God bless the Disney Channel. This Disney Channel with these movies that all end up the same way, you know, and real life doesn't usually work the way Disney does. You know, and if people buy that, if people think that kind of romance is real, you're gonna have a hard time with life. You know, you're gonna live on a set with no toilet. You know, it's a great metaphor. How do you live in a house with no toilet? People used to. You know, people used to all the time. With people had outhouses. My grandfather built a 3-family house with no toilet. You know, it was let's see, he built the house in 1914. It wasn't until 1927 that they put a bathroom in. But there were woods behind the house, you know. And I assumed that there was an outhouse. I recently saw a fence by my grandfather's property, so I realized that the outhouse wasn't on our property. Our chicken coop wasn't on our property either. But nobody lived there, and I guess it didn't matter. So, but anyway, you get the point. So, well, it's a real blessing for somebody to find out that everybody has some of those same kinds of struggles. And that we can learn to change our expectations, cut each other a break, and live in a way that is less offensive for both of you so that you can build. And eventually you start sharing the same experiences, seeing things the same way, seeing what was good and not so good from your families of origin and from your expectations that come from television or from a child's perception of somebody else's marriage or life. You know, some people think that some kids grow up never seeing their parents fight. Their parents never fight in front of the kids. So the first time there's a difference of understanding, they want a divorce. Why? Because they didn't learn how to fight. You know? My dad says, fight nice. You know, fight to understand, not fight to win. We're team members. Fight to build each other up. Fight to point out what's good and holy and real and true. And then work at pleasing each other and receiving your pleasure through the other. By sharing our contentment and our love for each other. So we need to learn all that stuff. So if they give you permission, then you can say, hey, this is what I do in my marriage. Or this is what I've tried, or this is what the church teaches, or this is what Christians think about this, and do with it what you will. You know? Otherwise, you're going to keep the same wrong expectations and keep getting disappointed in subsequent relationships. You know, so we need to find out what reality is. And we need to ask questions like what's fair, and what's reasonable, and what's holy. But you can't do it unless they give you permission, because they won't listen unless they give you permission. But if you get permission, then you have a better chance of being successful. tell the seminarians in our business, being right is not good enough. You have to be effective, and to be effective, you have to respond in a way that people can receive. Communication has two parts, right? You encode the message that you want to give, and you send it out. The other person hears that message through their own filters of experiences and such. Because your filters and their filters are so different, a lot gets deconstructed in the sending of the message. So you have to check to make sure. In my wife's family of origin, if you floated an idea and there was no response, it meant that idea is so stupid that we will not even dignify it with a discussion. But in my family of origin, if you floated an idea and there was no response, it meant, probably not the best idea, but it's okay with me. There was no objection. So one time my wife and I were having a drag-out fight, and I said, we talked about this. And she said, that's right, we talked about it. And I said, and you indicated that it was okay. And she said, I did not. And that's how I learned, after 3 months of fighting, that silence had a different meaning than it did in my family growing up. You see? It was a big revelation. You see? Because we grew up in different houses. And different houses have different ways of communicating. So we need to make peace with ourselves. We need to know that because God loves us, even if we're broken, we can heal, and other people can be part of that healing. We need to be as discerning as we can to know who we can trust with what. All right? If I have a problem with my prostate, I am not going to call my financial advisor for advice. Right? You got to go to somebody, you got to go to the right person with the right issue. Right? You get it, so you got to be discerning about who you ask what from. You know? So I think we need to be wise about what we say to which friends and aware of what they can handle. And ask yourself simple questions. What's appropriate? What's true? What's fair to both of us? What's God's understanding? What's holy? And if you ask these questions, you have a much better chance of being in God's will and coming up with the right stuff, with the right answers for life. I don't know, for me it's not rocket science. But it requires not just feeling, it requires testing your thoughts with the right questions. And the right questions bring the right solutions. And the wrong questions leave us spinning. Am I worthy of salvation? It's the wrong question. What does worthy mean? Am I worthy to receive a gift? What do you have to do to be worthy to receive a gift? You know? God loves us because he loves us. And salvation and God's love are not because we've accomplished something. Not because we've performed something well. It's because God is God, and that's his choice. So it's a lousy question. Not all questions are good questions. But good questions bring us better answers. So we need to ask the right question. How do you forgive? How do you let go of stuff? How do you detach from your former delusion our system of thinking? How do you detach from bad habits or addictions and mistakes in order to latch onto God and share in His glory? How do you do it? Some people have rules. You have to apologize with these words, magical words. I'm sorry for. Some people can't bring themselves to ever say, I'm sorry. The best they can do is start talking to you after they've pouted for 3 days. It's the best they can do. Anybody know anybody like that? Or am I the only one? Oh, I feel so lonely now. You see? We know people like that, right? So it's okay to accept the best they can give. And maybe later on they'll learn from your example how to ask for real forgiveness. But we forgive as much for ourselves, or maybe more for ourselves, than for the other person. And the other person doesn't have to accept our forgiveness for us to be detached and free. If we mess up, we ask for forgiveness and they don't give it, we're still free, if we choose to be. We can still walk with that person and be peaceful in ourselves. And we need to be peaceful in order to have new relationships. The world is playing tag. Tag is a universal game. And children who don't speak the same language play tag. One kid starts moving towards the other kid and the other kid takes off. And he chases him until he tags him, and then they reverse the process. The whole world is playing tag. And if you want something from somebody, they're going to run. If you want a relationship, you can't play tag. So what do? They run towards you, and you stand still. Games are over, and you have an opportunity for life, for connection. To be vulnerable, to be open. Somehow we have this message that's taught that vulnerability is not manly. Vulnerability is a bad thing. Vulnerability means you're weak. Nobody was more vulnerable than Christ. And Christ had the armies of the angels, had more power than anything of the created world. And vulnerability is strength. Guys, women find vulnerability very sexy in men. It's a fact. You see? It's okay to be vulnerable. And if someone misuses your vulnerability, bad on them. And that's their problem. And you can let their silliness drop to the floor. You don't have to worry. You can be vulnerable and show your strength. Okay? I tell the kids, don't be sore winners. You know what a sore winner is? You know what a sore loser is, right? Somebody who loses and gets mad. What if you win and get mad? That's what we do. Our world is so complicated. We have so many layers of metacognition that we super analyze everything and we get mad even when we win. If you win, don't gloat, just chill. Be satisfied with the win. If you have God, then you stole your wives from their daddies. It's not a competition anymore. Don't be a sore winner. Ladies, you stole your man from his mother. Don't make him like, you know, the Native Americans had this practice where they would take two horses and tie somebody to the two horses and rip their bodies apart. You know? That's what it feels like when a guy is pinned between his mother and his wife. You know? Don't do that, you know? You want him. Be satisfied with the win. Don't be a sore winner. You know? You make your point, you give them time to adjust, you let it go. You know? And together you come to understand each other and have ups and downs, cool ups and heat ups and cool downs and all the stuff that real life is. All relationships are, all friendships are, and that's just the process. Stop watching Disney. Stop living in a fantasy world that's not based on real people. Living in houses that require toilets. You know? Quit doing that. All right, some relationship advice. Let me hear some. How do you forgive? How do you maintain healthy relationships? How do you forgive? One day I was on my way to work and I got to the church parking lot and there was a city truck blocking the church parking lot because they were filling holes in the street. So I parked in the street and I came out at the end of the day and I had a ticket. So the ticket was for $35. I spent $25, parked the car. I waited 2 hours for my time to see the judge. All right? And the judge said to me, "Were you parked in the street?" I said, "Yes." "Then why don't you pay the ticket?" So I told him my sad story. At the end of my story, he said to me, "Were you parked in the street?" I said, "Yes." "Then why don't you pay the ticket?" I repeated my sad story. The third time, I lifted my finger and I said, "Because your truck was in the way of my parking spot." It got his attention. He said, "You mean a city truck was blocking your driveway?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." And he stamped my ticket satisfied. All that, I didn't get a non-guilty. I was guilty. But I didn't have to pay a fine. The debt was satisfied because he had a stamp that said satisfied. Okay? So everybody gets a stamp today that says satisfied, that you can stamp on all the tickets. Not the tickets that you get, but all the offenses that you can cancel. Because a sin creates a debt. And God satisfies the debt, and we can accept the satisfied debt and be free to be detached. All the sins that we attach to, we need to detach from. Why? Because they get in the way of Christian life. And you can't carry them into heaven. You can't carry addictions into heaven. Angry feelings into heaven. Grudges into heaven. Doesn't work. You can't have peace and joy unless you satisfy all these debts and go forward. Imagine you had an ice cream truck, and the ice cream truck is parked next to a private lake, and you know all of your customers, and you have this custom that at the end of the summer, everybody gets credit because everybody goes swimming without money, and you know where they live, and you're not worried about them paying, and they all have good money, and you've been doing it for years, and you know all their names, and so at the end of the summer, you give them a tally. But now, this year, towards the beginning of the summer, you win $30 million in the lottery. Now you have a dilemma. Are you going to collect your $30 million, or are you going to stay the rest of the summer so you can get your debts, so that people will pay their debts? You've got a problem. What do you want to do? You want to receive God's peace? Or you want to get paid your debts, get your money, get your ice cream money?
Take the 30 million.
You'll take the 30 million. Anybody else take the 30 million? I would take the 30 million. I cancel the debts. I'm not gonna sit in a hot truck without air conditioning, trying to wait for people to buy ice cream all summer long. I've got $30 million waiting for me. And the lottery office. What do you think? Cancel the debt. Yes?
Can you, forgive me if everybody else understands this, I'm a little confused. When Christ died on the cross, that was not a transactional action.
That's right.
But we are talking about debts being paid, so that sounds transactional. So
Okay,
can you explain
sure.
that?
What is transactional is that when we sin, we create a debt. And Christ chose to wipe out our debts because it's his nature. All right? So if you see a friend that you really appreciate at the country club, and you pick up his tab, now he has no bill because you wanted to be nice. So God paid the tab, paid our tab, because he wants, because that's his nature. So what's transactional is that we ate at the restaurant and somebody owes money for that meal. What's not transactional is the gift of salvation that God gives.
Is it fair to say that the debt is not to God? We don't owe the debt to God.
Except, Father, that every sin really is against a particular person and or all of humanity and always and God. Because vengeance is mine, saith the Lord is the boss. And so if we make a mistake against our spouse, we also sin against God. And we also sin against humanity. And our sins affect cosmically the whole universe. One time, my first son was born with a medical problem where the heart didn't send enough blood to the lungs, and it was on a heart-lung bypass machine, and it was experimental at the time, and it was before the hospitals knew the relationship between keeping the lights on in the intensive care units and disrupting people's sleep cycles. Right? It was actually part of a study that led to lowering the lights in hospitals. So anyway, when we brought him home from the hospital, he was very healthy and everything was great, but he didn't sleep because in the hospital there was no morning, afternoon, or night. It was just light on all the time. Or at least he didn't sleep at night. But this one Saturday night, we got him to sleep. But two drunks had a fight outside his window and woke him up at 1 a.m. And I walked up and down the hall of my house with my son on my back from 1 to 6. 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. I then got him down, took my shower, went to the church, and started the services. Well, I confess to you that I might have been a testy priest that morning. I might not have been so gentle with the altar boys. And they may have gone home and been miserable to their parents. And perhaps before these drunks woke up, they had affected a quarter of the population of my town. Their sin affected the whole town. You see? So we need to know that our sin, if I stay up watching cartoons all night, I'm going to preach a lousier sermon. I'm going to be less prepared. And my sin is going to mean that the people who come to church to hear me will be less inspired, and they will lift up the town and the community less. So all our sins have cosmic weight. So when we forgive, it's on our level, it's on the church level, it's on God's level. The priest actually speaks on behalf of the whole church community and God, saying God forgives the sin, and we, the church, on behalf of humanity, accept your confession and your choice to live better and to be a giver instead of a taker in the weightiness of kindness and gentleness to the world. See? Thanks, Father Mike.
I think the
clarification.
Yeah, no, I think we understand that our sin affects the whole world. I think the semantical problem that's happening is that I teach our catechumens that we don't believe in the satisfaction theory of atonement.
Okay.
Which says that our sin creates an offense against God's honor, and He can't forgive us unless we give a satisfaction that equals the offense.
Okay. As a dad, do you worry about your honor?
No?
You just love your son?
Yeah.
All right. So we agree.
Yeah. But the satisfaction theory says that every sin basically creates a punishment that requires to make satisfaction for that punishment. And then there's the whole thing about who did Jesus pay the price
too. Right.
And St. Gregory the theologian says he didn't pay it to God.
Right.
God didn't ask for that. He wouldn't pay it to the devil.
Right.
The devil doesn't have that kind of
Yes. Yeah.
He pays it to the reality of death.
Yeah.
To our existential situation.
Sure.
So I think the debt thing is,
Yes.
because the Protestants often talk about salvation in terms of, we owed a debt to God that we couldn't pay, and Jesus pays the debt. There's truth to that, but it comes with all kinds of baggage.
Right. Okay. That's very helpful.
I guess it's sifting out what's the baggage. What is the baggage? Because when you're talking, it's like, okay, that sounds like, the atonement that, and just understanding my understanding coming into the Orthodox Church was that what Christ did was not a legal transaction, but more a medical transaction because of
Our
sin
needs.
was a disease rather than a.
Sure. Okay. The dead language that I'm using is about detaching from the sin, and even from some of the result of the sin. Sin has its own consequence, and that's not a payment. It's just a consequence. So if you shoot me, I'll be dead. So there's a consequence of you having shot me. God can forgive you, and you can have eternal life, but I'll still be dead. Now you can apologize to me, even after I'm dead. And I can forgive you or not forgive you, but if I'm already basking in God's love, then, I may realize that you saved me thousands of dollars in taxes. And forgive you, yeah, so I don't want to get tied up in those weeds. And yeah, our God is not a transactional God, and we're not, but there is a feeling that creates an abyss between us and the people who offended us. And we can cancel that debt to be free to love God and to love the people who offend us, even if we never trust them again. I served in New Kensington, and there was a priest in that parish from 1920 to 1977, 57 years. And one of the things that he's quoted as having said often is, being Christian doesn't mean you have to be stupid. So you can forgive someone's debt, but you don't have to lend them money again. Right? So you can cancel the debt, and that doesn't require you to give the money. Okay? But yeah, so when we sin against each other, we created that. When we sin against the world, we created that. And the church can cancel that debt. God can cancel that debt. And that debt is connected to God's sacrifice, but certainly not limited to God's sacrifice. He wipes away the debt, as is his choice. And our not deserving it, using human justice, doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying is moot. Yeah, we just can't carry all that extra weight. So a practical way to let go of that weight. Practice letting go of the weight. Knowing that it's better for us helps us lower that weight. Telling our spouses what they can do to help us feel more confident that that problem won't happen again, which may require speaking to each other more and more, having more and more date time. Anybody here too old to date? Too old to date?
Oh.
You see, I mean, even if you're in your 90s, you can still date. Your spouse can be happy with your spouse at 90. We can share, we can have fun, we can do things that are fun. We can go to church together. Even listen to a bishop together. It's just fun. Something out of the ordinary, something you don't do every day. So So do things that are fun. Those things help us set aside. And know that we have the authority and power vested in us by God himself to forgive each other. If you're waiting for permission to forgive your spouse, God gives you that permission. Bishop said so. Take the permission and run. Yes, sir.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but maybe with the debt language, it maybe pulls out a little bit of our responsibility or our culpability in the act, rather the medical language is like there is a sickness in this, and I think those are maybe just two human words to describe whatever this thing is that's sin, right?
Right.
It separates us from.
So sin is a disease, and a disease makes us not at ease. And not at ease means not at peace. And peace is a gift that comes from God. Let me take that route. I like it. So, what do we need in order to heal? We need a clean space. We need a will to be peaceful. We need to see God in our presence and share his light and his warmth and his tenderness. We need to experience his love as he gives it and not as others told us he's like. We need to see him as he comes to us as an infant, vulnerable. How do we make a safe place to heal? Give ourselves permission to heal, to not be afraid of healing. Maybe we should look at the worst case scenarios. The worst case scenarios is that our friend or our spouse insults us again. Then we can say, well, if this happens again, I'll do this and this. You know, or you can be creative or playful. And you can, we can look to learning theory and see how we can unlearn dysfunctional ways and learn healthier ways to learn, learn about learning, and put into practice a different way of living. But ultimately, who is it that we need to get permission from to forgive? You have to give you permission. God gives you permission. The church gives you permission to forgive. So give yourself permission. Stop blocking the way in order to protect yourself. That's why we don't forgive. We're protecting ourselves from getting hurt again. Give yourself permission to try it, even if it's just once. And take that permission and live. Go forward. Yes?
I'm thinking, I keep getting back to your image of stamping paid or whatever it was.
Satisfied.
We need a better image to get away from that debt concept.
Okay.
I can't think of anything.
The healing image. That we go to God and we give ourselves permission to open the wound, clean it out, and let it heal. Your son breaks his leg playing hockey. You take him to the ER. He says, my leg hurts. Don't let them hurt me anymore. So do you give the doctors permission to cause your son pain to straighten out his leg and set it? Or do you let your son be lame for the rest of his life? So it's a choice to endure some temporary pain, to be restored to health, and get to walk again. Is that helpful? That's the medical model that's suggested that we also use in the church. Okay. All right. A visual image of healing? Ah, okay. Then taking the cast off and starting to walk.
Or having a scan that shows everything's clear.
Yes.
But we do have an analogy of death in the New Testament, and the fathers use some of that language. It's just, remember, it's just analogy, and it's not claiming to express, to describe or explain the whole mystery. But when they do use death, for instance, Jesus himself, he says one of the servants owed the master however much it was, 1,000 talents,
Yes.
which is an enormous amount. And the servant says, please don't send me to jail, and my family would sell my family. And so the master forgives the debt. And then that servant goes to another servant who owes him just a little tiny amount, and he demands that he pays him. And he can't pay him, and he doesn't forgive the fellow servant.
And puts him in jail.
Yeah. So obviously, that parable is telling us that God has forgiven us an enormous amount.
So we can forgive each other.
Yeah, so that's the motivation for forgiving others.
All analogies and all metaphors are going to limp a little bit. So we need to think a little bit past the metaphors and the language and the words to approach this God who is ultimately so great that we can't measure. Yes?
What does forgiveness look like? If someone has hurt us and we say, I forgive you, well, it's very easy to say those words, but what is going on inside me? And so it's like, what is true forgiveness?
So the Greek word is about being able to walk together peacefully.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? It means that instead of carrying around all this anger inside, I'm going to be finished with the anger and be peaceful and accept our past offenses as data and be free to be at peace with one another.
So I guess then the next question would be how? I mean, I remember, I'm sure many people are familiar with the story of Corey Ten Boom, when she sees the former, the prison guard who
Yes.
was there, and she says to God, I cannot forgive this man. You are going to have to forgive him for me. Or
In me.
I don't know.
In me.
And in me, right. And she said that she was just flooded with that peace. And I'm thinking, is that the how sometimes? Is that
Yes.
I cannot forgive?
Sure. So but God is sealed inside of you. The Holy Spirit is sealed inside of you. So the Holy Spirit can forgive. And so then you can choose to go along with that. You can choose to finish being angry. Or you could choose to be angry forever. But the anger takes a lot of energy and steals your time and steals your happiness. So it starts with a choice. I choose to be done with that and to start anew. Like God chooses to give us anew. So that's without the debt analogy. That's just a simple choice to turn history into history and not into a present fight. Can I have a pleasant dinner with a Roman Catholic priest 1,000 years after the schism? Depends on the priest. But if he thinks he's better than me because of the schism, then I'm going to be aggravated. But if he's pleasant, I can be pleasant. But I'll still argue with him theologically. I'm not going to give up on on the truth that was delivered to us. But we can have a nice meal. And we can learn from each other. Especially as it relates to the town's laws about historic buildings and what you can and can't fix. You know, imagine having your temple declared a historic monument, which means you can't put in air conditioning. You empty out the church. The Romans are ahead of us in having historic buildings, so they know the lawyers with the loopholes. We can share. Learn from each other, work together.
It seems like we talked earlier about the father and the prodigal, and that seems to be the prime example, right? I mean, the prodigal instinctively knew that he owed, let's say, a debt of an explanation, of ask for forgiveness to the father. The father didn't even ask for it.
No. When he came to his mind, when his senses returned, when he regained his head, he said, "My father's servants eat better. I'd rather be a servant on that farm than this farm."
Yeah, but even on the way he was preparing his thing, and the father never let him get it out.
No, the father surprised him. And that perhaps is another answer. God surprises us and gives us gifts that surprise us because his way is not our way. Our way is some kind of justice. I don't believe in justice on this side of the curtain. I don't really trust governments to always be right and always do the right thing. I don't trust police and judges always to be right. No fantasy about that. Especially in a post-Christian world.
I just think forgiveness is so countercultural right now because we just live in a place where if you don't agree with me, I just don't talk to you anymore. And so this is like such a place where we can continue the dialogue with grace with each other. Give each other grace.
Excellent.
And it's such a huge thing when we have half of our parish being new to us or new Christians, and that we have this great responsibility to share that.
Yeah. So let's love each other and keep our eye on God and not worry so much about pride and ego and things that people say that are wrong, or disagreeing on who should be president or politics or anything else. Keep that all outside.
On the question of how to forgive, I think we have to incorporate prayer into the equation. So I tell people to pray for the one who offended them consistently.
Okay.
Because prayer is a form of love, and this act, it's not that I tell them, the saints tell us.
Okay. So Father Michael, just hold that for a second and tell me how that works. What's going on when you pray for somebody that you're angry with?
having been a recipient of that advice, I find when I pray for those who have offended me, I can't be angry anymore because it's an act of love. That maybe
Okay.
that's not how it
Okay.
originates in me, but that's what it becomes.
Okay.
And when I love someone, I can't hold that against them.
Okay, so when you face God, love comes. What else happens? What stops when you face God instead of your enemy? Enemy, what a strong word. What happens when you face God instead of your enemy?
You receive grace.
Yes. What else?
Humble yourself.
Good. What else?
Take your eye off the enemy and make yourself vulnerable.
Good. What else? Who becomes the judge? God. So when you're angry, you're the judge. You're sitting there. When you face God, you put him back on the seat. And you don't have to judge anymore. That's, I think, how it works. Would you agree?
And it depends on what you pray as well, because if you can start to pray that that person, that God would be merciful to that person, that he would forgive them, that he would be compassionate to them, that he would not hold that against them.
And that he would fix them. I did it.
And that we would not become a stumbling block to their salvation.
Because that would be bad on us.
In a sense, by not forgiving them. But then I think all of that brings you back to a new perspective. I sometimes tell people, would you be happy then if that person goes to hell? Or do you want them to go to hell? No. No. So then you want God to bless them and save them. It changes your attitude.
Seems like what you're saying, Lord, is the same thing we would be praying for ourselves, so we put ourselves in the same boat with him, don't we? I mean, when we're praying that prayer, saying, hey, we're the same people, and if I can't forgive him, then Christ, you can't forgive me.
That's Mother Alexandra's kind of contribution. She would say the Lord's Prayer every day, but instead of saying, forgive us as we forgive those, say, forgive me as I forgive Mildred. God, forgive me as I forgive Mildred. And that changes. That's a practical thing you can do to help you forgive. Yes, sir.
We still have enemies, I mean, practically in the world. I mean, you could say spiritual, but practically, like forgiving them is one thing, but then
Yeah. Build a bigger wall.
still is
Protect yourself. Do what you need to do to protect yourself so that you can forgive them. But hating them doesn't make us taller, healthier, happier. And sometimes if you make an effort to understand the circumstances of your enemy, you know, if your enemy is your neighbor who keeps calling the police on you because of your hedges, you know, feels like an enemy, right? Sure. So if understand why they're so hung up, understand why they have such trouble, why they're so, what do the psychologists say, anal retentive, you know, they're so controlling. 15 generations of people who are controlling in their family, you know, we don't know. To understand other people's complexities and difficulties and problems and situations. That's a helpful way allow us to forgive, to understand somebody really, and to understand historically their perspective. And at least we can still disagree, but we can maybe problem solve differently if we can consider them broken or in need instead of hating them. Because hating them is a problem for us. How about if we take 15 minutes and then talk a little bit about what the church community can do to support us all in our attempts to build relationships that are holy and healthy and fruitful.
Okay, thank you, sir.